Everybody. It's a great pleasure to have this webinar with Brad Libby on the pattern of progress, looking into the past and the future and seeing what is happening. I'm really looking forward to this presentation. So please take the stage, Brad.
Okay, thank you very much. I guess this is a special event date and time. It's not your regularly scheduled one, I think, because I went to one event before. So I just want to thank you for having this special event because I was not able to attend in February, and I won't be able to in March either. Um, so the purpose of this presentation is that I would just like to tell a bit about this book that I've written and published it last year. And I'll tell a bit about myself and the organization I work for. But I think I'll just jump right into talking about the book, and then I can talk a little bit about myself and Rethink X, the organization I work for, a little bit later. But this book that I've written, this is sort of my COVID project. Basically, it's called The Pattern of Progress: How Radically Cheaper, Easier, Faster, Better Technologies and Ideas Rapidly Change the World. So I started working for the organization I work for, Rethink X, in 2017, late 2017. And in early 2018, started on this project. It didn't really start out as a project. It just started out as an observation, and it kind of snowballed over time to get bigger and bigger. But this observation that technologies tend to replace each other in a sort of predictable way. There's a number of steps that a technology goes through when it gets invented and adopted in the marketplace. And it seems to be the same series of steps and the same sort of pattern over and over again. So when I talk about the pattern of progress, I hope that you can see my slide is moving. I've advanced to a graph now with red and blue lines. Okay, good. So when I talk about the pattern, this is what I mean. This is a little bit complicated of a diagram, so I'll take a little while to explain what's going on here. But the x-axis across the bottom is time in years, and I'm just choosing some random numbers here that are sort of typical for many technologies. So 0 to 40 years. And then the y-axis up and down is the size of a market. So you have some incumbent technology or a solution. The way we currently do things is the red line, and then some new disruptive technology is invented, some new way of doing things. And there's actually quite a bit of information in this graph, but the disruptive technology is invented. Very often it can be a long period of time, 20 years or more, before the new technology, the disruptor technology, becomes sort of cheap enough and good enough that it can compete in the marketplace. But then it can take over a market very quickly, over 10, 15 years, and not only cause the incumbent to peak and then collapse, but also grow the overall market. So I have it going up to 300, so 3 times the size of the original market. But again, it differs for different technologies. But we've seen this pattern over and over again. Maybe you've probably seen it in your own lifetime. But things like, email. So a man named Ray Tomlinson invented email in the mid 1970s, late 1970s. But most people in the world hadn't heard of it or used it because we didn't have computers in our homes. So all throughout the late 1970s, all throughout the 1980s, and early part of the 1990s, people didn't have computers in their homes. But 20 years later, mid 1990s, all of a sudden, over about a 15-year period, people have home computers, they have internet connections, and people sign up for email addresses. And now we're seeing postal services around the world struggling with the fact that a lot of communication is by electronic means now. We've seen this with photography. So there used to be film cameras, and again, about the same time, mid 1970s, a man named Steve Sasson invented the digital camera, but it was enormous, it was expensive, it could only hold a few photos, it was not very good compared to film cameras. So the film industry continued to grow until, again, the mid 1990s, late 1990s. 20 years or so later, when sensors got cheap enough, lithium ion, different kinds of batteries, but batteries got cheap enough, the computer memory was large enough that digital cameras could start to compete with film cameras. And now, of course, today, we have more cameras per person. We take more photos per person. People take photographs of their lunch and post it on Instagram or something like that of, things that you just didn't do back in the days when film was expensive. So this sort of, when I refer to the pattern, this is what I'm talking about, this X-shaped graph of a disruptor growing in an S-shaped curve over 15 years or so after a maybe 20-year kind of incubation period, and then the incumbent peaking and collapsing just as quickly. So the idea that new innovations typically grow in an S-shaped pattern is not something that I've discovered. This is something that has been known for a very long time. Clayton Christensen wrote a book called The Innovator's Dilemma, where he talks about this. Everett Rogers has a book called Diffusion of Innovations that talks about this. These books are decades old now. So this is not a new idea that new technologies grow in an S-shaped pattern. But as the disruptor starts to grow, the old or incumbent technology reaches a peak. This is a point that I work with and for a man named Tony Seba, who himself has written a number of books about disruptive technologies, especially in areas like energy and transportation. But he says, the peak of the older technology, the peak in sales, the peak in market size, peak in profits, tends to come when the disruptor is a small portion of the total market. So if you were selling film cameras and film back in the late 1990s, and digital cameras were just taking off, it was probably easy to say to yourself, hey, we've had film for over 100 years. Film is much better, quality than digital cameras. All of the famous Hollywood directors use film, real photographers use film, and digital cameras might be useful, for some people to connect to their computers, but they're never going to take over the market. And sure enough, over the next 10 or 15 years or so, the old way of doing things collapsed. We stopped selling film and film cameras for the most part, and now everything's digital cameras, and everything is LED light bulbs instead of incandescent light bulbs, and cars instead of horses. We've seen this pattern many times before. So this is what I refer to as the pattern. And here's one example of landline phones. This is in blue, and then mobile phones. So again, from the mid 1990s to the early 2010s, mobile phones took over the market from landline phones. And this wasn't a perfect competition because people had landline phones as part of package deals with their internet and that sort of stuff. So it hasn't collapsed to zero. But again, this is the general pattern that I'm talking about: S-shaped explosive growth over a 15-year or so period. And now basically everybody in the world has a mobile phone subscription. I think it's literally more people have mobile phones than have toothbrushes and flush toilets. And that shows you just how important communications are in people's lives. But we've seen it, many, many times before. You've seen it in your own lifetime. Landline phones, as I just said, going to cell phones, these kind of Nokia style feature phones. And then again, over a 10-year period or so, 2007, Apple introduces the iPhone, and then Nokia gets wiped out from the phone business over a few years. We've seen it, as I said, with cameras. We had film cameras. We went to these standalone digital cameras, and then again, the smartphone comes along and wipes out these standalone digital cameras. And this is all driven by economics. It's just that computer processing got cheaper. Now the memory got cheaper, the sensors for the cameras got more powerful and cheaper. And after a while, what was a clunky toy that Steve Sasson at Kodak built and showed off to his bosses that could barely take a photograph, now even Hollywood directors are using digital digital cameras because they're cheaper and they're just better. With digital images, you can edit them more easily, um, and so if you make a mistake, something doesn't come out quite right in shooting, you can edit the scene and afterwards a lot more easily than you can do with film. We've seen it multiple times in music. So we've, in our own lifetimes, or at least my lifetime, vinyl records going to cassette tapes, to compact discs, to MP3s, and now to streaming. So again, each of these took over the market, but also expanded the market. There's much more streaming of music than there were, sales of vinyl records or cassettes. And it's not just a matter of population growth. It's also just that it's just easier, it's cheaper, it's faster. Nowadays, you can go to YouTube, type in the name of a song that pops into your head, and you can start listening to it in a few seconds, rather than having to somehow find something on some sort of medium. So I started thinking about these examples. As I said, I work for an organization. Rethink X is a not-for-profit organization that studies technology disruptions, how quickly one technology replaces another, how quickly technologies are getting cheaper, how they're getting better, and then which technologies are sort of shaping the future of the world. Lithium-ion batteries that started out, being used in these consumer electronics, but now are powering cars, and now they're also being used for electrical storage for national scale energy grids, electric grids. So I just started collecting examples, and it started out as kind of an interest and a hobby, and then it became an obsession, and then it's now just a habit, really. But I started, we've seen the pattern. Here's the basic X-shaped curve that I showed off before, but I saw it in textiles produced. This might be a little difficult to read, and I apologize if the text is too small, but I'll just sort of walk you through each of these graphs. In the upper left-hand corner, we have a textile produced using different kinds of dye stuffs. So there's a red dye called alizarin that's found in a plant called madder, and it was used for thousands of years to dye fabric red. So it's a plant that makes fabric red in color. And then in the late 1800s, German chemists figure out how to synthesize it. We figure out how to make it in a laboratory. And all of a sudden, it becomes much cheaper. And so we use much more of it. We've seen it in sailing. So the bottom left here, the red and the blue, sailing ships getting replaced by steamships. And they peak when steam is still only a fraction of the number of sailing ships, but after a few decades, steamships completely dominate the market. In the upper right-hand corner, I'm showing the film cameras getting replaced by digital cameras. That's the gray line, and then digital cameras getting replaced by smartphones, and that's the blue line. And in the lower right, we used to get fertilizer from guano, which is bird droppings. And then we found nitrates in soil in Chile. And then we figured out the Haber-Bosch process. Again, a couple of German chemists figured out how to synthesize ammonia for fertilizer. And now we have much more fertilizer. And the implications of that, of course, are enormous. Food is much cheaper. The population has exploded because we figured out how to do something cheaper and in much larger volume, and no longer constrained by what nature basically has given us. We're able to make the chemicals that we want. So again, I collected just so many examples, just everything I could think of. The person who wrote the foreword for my book, Tony Seba, I hope that you've heard of him before, and if you haven't, I'll talk about him a little bit later. But he has given presentations where he talks about how cars replaced horses. So here I have a graph of the distance traveled in the United States by horses and by cars over the course of decades. So we know how many cars were registered every year and about how far they travel per year. And the U.S. Department of Agriculture has a census of horses, so we know how many horses are in the U.S. And it was really over about a 15-year period. So 1900, there were basically no cars In the US, I think there are only something like 4,000 registered that year. 20 years later, the amount of traveling is dramatically higher than it ever was with horses, and the whole market is taken over by cars. If you were in the horse business in 1900, you were out of business, or even 1910, you were out of business 10 or 15 years later. So I started collecting these examples and put them all together, in part because of who Rethink X is. As I told you, it's a not-for-profit organization that analyzes and forecasts the speed and scale of technology-driven disruptions and their implications across society. So we, as I said, we tend to do this for technologies that are shaping the world right now: lithium-ion batteries, robots, drones, solar power, wind power, things like that. But when you start collecting these examples, you find so many from history. And I just asked myself, so this was right when COVID was starting, how many different examples can I find, from history, and quantitative data. So I put together a database, so just a big spreadsheet, where I found about 1,500 examples, from fire and thread and metal tools to autonomous electric vehicles, solar photovoltaics, wind power, lithium-ion batteries, the things that Rethink X is interested in. And then from that, I chose about 150 key technologies that enabled or disrupted others. When you start collecting these examples, you put them into chronological order, and you realize, they're all kind of interconnected. So electricity gave us the light bulb. Electricity also resulted in electrolyzers, which was a way of producing aluminum. So aluminum is one of the most common elements in the Earth's crust, but it's typically locked up in rocks, bound to oxygen. Late 1800s, we figure out how to get pure aluminum, and now we can do things like, the Wright brothers engine for their airplane was made from aluminum because it's much lighter weight than steel. So they were able to make the airplane. And airplane bodies, of course, in the early 1900s were made from a lot of aluminum. So here, this idea, the light bulb gives us aluminum. The light bulb also becomes the basis of, any sort of sealed glass tube becomes the basis of the vacuum tube. That gives us radio, that gives us computers. All of these things are interconnected. So I started not just listing the technologies and sort of writing descriptions about when they were invented, where they were invented, who invented them, how quickly they took over the market, whatever data I could find on how quickly they disrupted some other technology or displaced some other technology, but then how they were all interconnected. So the radio gives rise to computers, and that gives rise to electric cars, and things like that. So when I began putting them together, so here's some of those examples. Again, like I showed earlier, coal gas gives us the incandescent light bulb and gives us the LED. The typewriter gets disrupted by the desktop computer, and that gets disrupted by the laptop. So I started going back in, it's easy to find these recent examples from technology and things from Silicon Valley, but I went back in time, and we used to, back in the early 1300s, we would knock down castle walls using a trebuchet. So a big device with a big arm that would throw a giant rock. And then in the early 1400s, about 1420s, 1430s, we start making cannons. So a big metal vessel, you shove again a rock about the same size as what a trebuchet would fire, because of gunpowder. So in the early 1400s, Europeans figure out a key process for making gunpowder, which is don't just make it a powder, but do what's called corning. So you make it into gunpowder into little pellets. It makes it explode rather than sort of burn, and it makes it much more powerful, and this gives rise to firearms. Cannons give rise to firearms, and then big cannons like this give rise to little ones on ships. It completely changes shipping around the world and combat. I found examples from arrowheads. So the lower figure here is arrowheads from Great Britain from roughly 2400 BC, so 4,400 years ago, and then 100 years later, the style completely changes. So the earlier ones are what are called leaf-shaped or pinnate arrowheads, where you have the tip facing forward, and you poke someone or something that you want to kill, and then we switched to this chisel shaped, which is kind of like a razor blade edge, and it causes much more damage. Keep in mind, arrows tend to spin as they fly. So if you get stuck with this leaf shaped arrowhead, it makes a hole in you. But if you get hit with a chisel shaped arrowhead, it slices, a much wider gouge that results in much more blood loss. So the one arrowhead on the right is much deadlier than the one on the left. So and it's not just Great Britain that's seen this, but parts of Africa or all around the world who have used bows and arrows have seen these kinds of progressions before. Of one kind of arrowhead gets replaced by another. We see it with nails. So in the late 1700s, we would make nails just by pounding. We'd take iron rod and pound it out and pound a head onto it, and each nail would be made by hand. So nails are very expensive. Then we come up with this idea of let's just make a sheet of iron and cut wedges. And it's much faster, much easier, makes nails that are much cheaper. And then when we invent steel Bessemer, the Bessemer process for making steel, we start making steel wire, round wire, and shape each of the ends. And this is even cheaper still. So, even these very simple tools, things that we've used like arrowheads and nails that we've used for literally thousands of years, we can see disruptions. And each of these transitions from hand wrought nails to cut iron nails, and then from cut iron nails to steel wire nails, each took about a 15-year period or so. And now we're seeing these playing out still. It's not like technology change has stopped. On the contrary, it's happening. We're seeing it in artificial intelligence. We're seeing it in genetics and biology. So Tony's example of the horse carriage to the internal combustion engine car, and just in the last 15 years, we've been seeing electric cars taking over the market from internal combustion engine cars, especially in places like here in Norway, where basically 95% plus of new cars sold now are electric. And now Tesla and Waymo, which is a division of Google, are making cars that drive themselves, robo-taxis. A car you get in, you don't have to own it yourself. You push a button on your phone, there's the smartphone again, and you push a button on your phone, the car rolls up to you, you get in, you pay by the distance that you travel, or you pay by the trip, then you get out and the car rolls away to serve someone else. So you'd never even need to own a car. This will not only get rid of the electric cars and internal combustion engine cars, but it gets rid of these are electric as well, but the individually owned electric car. It gets rid of the whole concept of car ownership if these are cheap enough to run. So like I said, I started collecting these examples, and then I started kind of mapping out how they're interconnected. What if you're looking at robo-taxis, which have the potential to dramatically change how much oil we use in the world? Robo-taxis down in the lower right there are the result of a convergence of technologies. It's in order to make a car that drives itself, you have to make an electric car. But then you need sensors. So Tesla's robo-taxis use digital cameras, which disrupted film cameras. They have very powerful computers. Computers came from the vacuum. There's a whole history of computers, of different generations of mechanical switches, and then vacuum tubes, and then transistors. But basically, radio and TV to some extent gave rise to the computer. The lithium-ion battery, which is used for laptops. So I sort of mapped all these things out, basically for my own benefit, to see how they're interconnected. The cannon gave rise to the horse carriage, believe it or not. So it was firearms. Handheld firearms. So the cannon gives rise to handheld firearms, and handheld firearms is why we took wagons and started enclosing them in thick walls, is so that you could travel about. There's a place in Hungary called Koch. There's a city that made horse carriages, and that's where we get the English word coach, as a name for a horse-drawn carriage. So I started mapping out how all of these things are connected, and this is the table of contents of my book. So this is one of the pages in the book. This is also an online interactive little map that you can visit and click on any of these. So for each of these is a technology. I realize it's difficult to read, but each of these is a technology um, that is showcased in the book. So there's roughly 150 here and about 1,000-word kind of description of each, and then how they're all interconnected. So here I'm just showing, let's just take this section here and zoom in. So if we want to talk about the car, here's the automobile in one corner. It came from, and I just showed you some of these interconnections. It came from the internal combustion engine and from the coach, the stagecoach, and from horses. The stagecoach came from the wagon wheel and from handheld firearms, and firearms came from being able to make steel. The car depended making the car depended on gauge blocks. They're called Johannessen blocks. They were developed in Sweden, actually, which was a way to measure mechanical parts very precisely, and that originally came from the sewing machine. So basically, if you want to make cars, you at least have to be able to make sewing machines first, which means you have to be able to make steel, which means you also need sewing, and that gives us back to thread all the way in the upper left-hand corner that was invented by Neanderthals. So the oldest example of thread in the world comes from a cave in Spain, I believe, where Neanderthals were found to have sort of twisted fibers together to make thread. So we're talking, looking over thousands of years, hundreds of different technologies. I've color coded this according to food and agriculture are green, transportation is blue, energy related ones are red, materials are orange, labor saving devices are gray, and how they're all interconnected. And like I said, there's an online tool. If you go to rethinkx.com, you can find the pattern of disruption widget, we call it, and you can click on any one of these technologies, see all of the technologies that caused it to come into being, and then find data and a short description about, from any of these, about how quickly they took over their market. And then as well, all of these are described in the book. The book has something like 150 figures in it. So for each of these technologies, how quickly it displaced whatever incumbent technology it displaced. So then now I have this has become a project that's sort of more than a book. I've gathered these examples of different technologies throughout history. I've mapped out how they're all interconnected to each other. So now I have this database, and I've written a book from that database, but I can also sort of look into statistical features of all of these. Now it's more than 2,000 technologies that I've looked at. So one thing that I did was I said, from the year that something reached 10% of a market share, so we looked at automobiles and black and white television and human-made insulin and home air conditioners and running water and all sorts of other things, genetically modified sugar beets. From the year that they reached 10% of their market to how many years did it take them to reach 80% of the market? And I've got 100 or so data points here, but it's something like synthetic alizarin, that red dye that I mentioned, introduced in the early 1870s. It only took about 2, 3, 4, 5 years before it basically completely replaced natural red dyes. Other things took a little bit longer. Landline telephones and automobiles took a few decades. Some things, the three-point seatbelt, there's another Swedish invention. In the US, that only took 2 years. So early 1960s, it was mandated by the government. And basically, we went from very few new cars had three-point seatbelts developed by Volvo to 2 years later, it was mandatory. So so we often hear this expression that the world is changing faster now than it ever has before, or something like that. So a lot of people say things like that. Change is accelerating, and here I've been able to quantify just how quickly change is accelerating. If you look at a lot of technologies before early 1900s, they took often more than a decade. So 10, 20, this is a logarithmic scale. So every notch, we were going from 10 to 20 to 30 to 40 years. And then on the 1 to 10 scale, you can see the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 tick marks. But basically, before the early 1900s, things took more than a decade to be adopted. Now, 2000 and beyond, the last 25 years, nothing has taken more than 10 years. And even back from the 80s, the 70s, the 80s, the 90s, things rarely took more than 20 years. And of course, a lot of this is sort of computer technology and things. But as I said, I also looked at in agriculture, genetically modified crops. A lot of my data comes from the US, but I looked at transportation, energy, all different fields. And so over the course of roughly 170 years or so, we've gone from roughly 25 years for new technologies to be adopted in the marketplace. So this is the S part of that S-shaped curve, not the very long sort of incubation period at the beginning. But we've gone from roughly 25 years down to maybe 8 or so. 7 or 8 is typical. So over the course of about 170 years, we've lost 17 years. So every decade, roughly, new technologies are adopted 1 year faster on average than they were in previous decades. And I'm not 100% confident about that. Where do we go? How many more decades can we go into the future before we reach zero? Will new technologies be instantly adopted everywhere? I don't know how that would happen. But so I'm looking more into this. I'm trying to collect more of these examples because I can sort of see a kind of break right around the time of World War I, so roughly 1920 or so. It looks like there's something that qualitatively different that happened there, where a lot of technologies before World War I took longer to be adopted, and there's some sort of break that maybe I'm hallucinating, and I don't quite have the statistical skills to figure out. But it seems like there is something that happened, quantitatively there. So I finished sort of writing the book. I collect all these historical examples. It goes up to 2025. I included things like these recent examples. Here's car sales in Norway, going from essentially no fully battery electric cars to nowadays 2024, 2025, we're talking more than 90%, 95% battery electric. If we know this pattern, and we know how these technologies are interconnected, then why do I don't have to stop at the present day. This is kind of a history book, but I can just keep going into the future. I can take a look at these technologies that are shaping the future: battery electric cars and robo-taxis, ability to genetically modify organisms, and we can genetically modify yeast, and we can produce cow's milk protein that's already on the shelf. You can buy cow's milk that was brewed from yeast that did not involve any cows. So we don't need cows might get disrupted. Solar photovoltaics and wind power, and these are all interconnected too. With solar photovoltaic panels on your roof, you charge batteries in your car. You can drive, or maybe a robo-taxi pulls up. These cars rely on artificial intelligence, and these computer chips are getting faster. And everybody's seen what's happened with AI the last couple of years, where computers can generate videos of things that don't exist, and whatever full documents that are sometimes hallucinating false information. But even so, those systems are obviously better than they were. So I started to put these together. The last chapter of my book, I go through things that are what I think will happen over the next 15 years or so, or beyond, based on the technologies that are changing rapidly right now. Robotaxis changing transportation, and we're seeing humanoid-shaped robots doing backflips and working in factories and loading dishwashers and whatever. Um, and they're just getting better every year. AI is getting dramatically better. Solar power and wind and batteries are getting cheaper. They're being adopted very quickly, and are essentially 90% plus of new capacity that's coming online. People are not building coal-fired power plants anymore. They're not even building very many. They're not building very many nuclear power plants. Solar, wind, and batteries are just too cheap and easy to install compared to any large centralized system. And then one thing I haven't talked about very much in this presentation, but I do in the book, is precision fermentation. As I said, this idea of genetically modifying yeast to be able to brew cow's milk proteins. We can brew those same sorts of fabric dyes that I was talking about earlier, red dyes, indigo dyes, things like that. We can make perfumes, and we can make all sorts of individual molecules that we're now relying on nature, where we have to extract extract chemicals from nature, but instead we can brew them, and these all come together with food and agriculture, transportation, labor, information, and energy into what is shaping up to be the most dramatic change in technology and living standards in human history. This is not just, in some cases, it's not just a new technology replacing an old one. Solar, wind, and batteries is fundamentally different from burning any sort of fuel. If you build a coal-fired power plant or a natural gas-fired power plant or something like that, you are reliant on buying fuel for it. You want to minimize your use of fuel because fuel costs money. With solar panels and wind power, you don't burn anything. You buy the hardware up front, and then you just get energy from it after that. So you want to maximize your use of energy. You've gone from wanting to this conservation mindset of let's use as little energy so that we burn as little fuel as possible, to hey, the panels are on the roof and it's a sunny day, so we should use as much power as we can, because if you don't use power, it's wasted. So for literally the first time since the invention of fire, we can now get our power, we can get electricity without having to burn anything, without producing CO2 as a result. So this has huge implications for human health, for the environment, and for creating a world where we have much less air pollution, where we have safer, happier, healthier cities to live in, and where our labor can be done, through computers rather than people, freeing up people's time. The same way that 100 years ago, most people were farmers. 150 years ago, most people were farmers, and factories were open 6 days a week, 12 hours a day. And now most of us live much better quality lives than we did 150 years ago, in the days before penicillin and hot running water and things that make life pleasant. And this does not seem to be showing, not only not slowing down, we are going into sort of qualitatively different of forms of behavior. And it's a little too complicated for me to explain in this presentation, and because it's a separate book on its own, but it's this one that Tony Seba, who I mentioned earlier, and his co-author James Arbib wrote about in their book Stellar, A World Beyond Limits and How to Get There. So really part of the book is just to prepare you and set you up to read that book. But if you're interested in Rethink X's work, learning more about it, learning more about what Rethink X thinks about electric transportation and solar, wind, and batteries, and how they're going to change the world, there are free reports that are available at rethinkx.com. This interactive map that I showed you above of how all the technologies in my book are interconnected, that's also at rethinkx.com. And if you're interested in reading my book, The Pattern of Progress, How Radically Cheaper, Easier, Faster, Better Technologies and Ideas Rapidly Change the World, you can find it at Amazon or at Apple Books. And it's available in print format, it's available as an audiobook, or you can get it in electronic format if you want to read it on your phone or tablet. So that's my sort of description of my book, what led to me writing it, what it contains. If anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. Or if anything particularly interesting you want me to explain in a little greater detail, I'd be happy to do that too.
Great. Great presentation. Let's see. We've been thinking a lot of this, Christer. Do you want to start?
Yeah, thank you very much, Brad. This is so fascinating, and I have followed your work for some years now, and Tony's also. So
Oh, great.
it's very inspiring, and it's an eye opener to see the facts and data that you have searched for and you provided here, and to see these kind of patterns, and several of these patterns that you and your team have shown here, they change so fast that it's, yeah, the most people, they don't understand how fast these changes actually happens. But when you look at it in hindsight, and then you can see it, but when you're in the middle of it, you won't see it. But when you have, as you have done here, connected the dots to see the patterns, you can start, as you ended your presentation, then to even look into the future and see, based on these patterns, what, yeah, most certainly will evolve and happen.
Yeah, yeah. It surprises me too that that people at every time people sort of think what else could be invented. The way the world is now is sort of how it will always be. Um, but yet we've seen technology change so much in our own lives that you think, okay, every year, what else are they going to do with the iPhone? They're going to make it a little bit thinner next year. They're going to tell you the camera is so much better so that you have to go buy a new phone. Everybody will rush out and buy a new phone. But these things are really only 15 or 20 years old. And then before that we had the mobile phones. Before that we had the touch tone phones, the landlines. Before that there were the rotary phones and whatever else. These technology changes, and it's every 15, 20 years. So every movie that you watch that takes place in the past, you can tell approximately when it is. 1930 does not look like 1950, and 1950 doesn't look like 1970, and 1970 doesn't look like 1990. This has been going on for hundreds of years, maybe longer. I give some examples in my book from the animal kingdom of whales who have changed their songs over time, and we've recorded that. So it might not be a feature, just of human behavior. It could be, chimpanzees as well, and that's also in my book, where we've seen chimpanzees learn to use new tools and teach their friends to use new tools. So this is something that's been going on for hundreds of years, thousands, and is just a general sort of feature of any social network, I think. Um, and it's happened, in our own lifetimes. We've seen it in all different fields: energy and communications and transportation. And now you look at like science fiction from the 1970s or something like that, and it just looks so ridiculous because they couldn't imagine, even some of the things that we have. The movie A Clockwork Orange is supposed to take place in the future, and there's a scene where these three or four guys break into a house, and where an author lives, and the author, so he works from home. He has a desk and he has a typewriter on his desk. And it's sort of crazy that they make this movie, and they use the current technology, thinking that what could possibly replace the typewriter. And the way I see it, you could have chosen literally anything else, and it would have been better. And literally anything besides a typewriter. You could have just had the man talking to his hand or something like that, or whatever, talking to a pen or something. Hold up a pen and talking to the pen, and then he pulls out a sheet of paper with text on it, and don't explain how talking to a pen would make it, or a microphone or something would make the words appear. But just, anything besides a typewriter would have been a more realistic scene in that film. Because now we have things that people couldn't even imagine, that you can push a button on a computer. You have a screen that's indistinguishable from basically seeing another person. We have video conferencing. We have technologies that people have been dreaming of for hundreds of years, um, and uh, and have been in science fiction movies for decades and stories for decades, and now they exist. And things that we've been dreaming of are just starting to come into existence now. Cars that drive themselves, and humanoid robots that will do your laundry for you or whatever, so that you'll never have to wash your clothes again. You can just, the robot will come and mop your floors and whatever. And these things are genuinely uh, you know coming into the market now. Artificial intelligence, computer that you talk to and it talks back to you in a human voice in real time. It's just incredible how quickly this stuff is changing, and it's kind of crazy to think that it would not continue to change. So the way I see it, if you think that robot taxis or humanoid robots or solar power or wind power is not going to change our lives, it's up to you to prove why this is the exception, rather than up to the people who are building these technologies to prove why it will happen. Because we've just seen so many examples in so many different fields for so long, that it's if a fraction of what is happening now with in transportation and energy comes about, then it will change our world as dramatically as it has been changed in the last couple of decades. And the 2040s and 2050s will look completely different from today, just as the 1990s look completely different from the 1950s.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah, it's fascinating, and it's going faster.
Yes.
Any other questions or comments?
I have one more, but more like a question then. You talked about convergence, Brad, and, and convergence seems to be a very important piece of disruptions. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Sure. So the idea is, a lot of technologies are just putting together older parts, often with some new thing that comes along. So a new technology is invented and it enables something else. So the car is, we've been making coaches, so wagons, for thousands of years. The new technology that comes along is the internal combustion engine. Originally, they were so large, they came from steam engines, but they were so large that they were used in factories. And then, with steel, and we were able to get them to be small enough that you can now have a portable engine, an engine that moves itself. And the automobile, we were making coaches, but at the same time, uh, sort of mid 1880s or so, we are making steel tubing. The bicycle becomes popular. The rubber tire, the chain drive for the bicycle. And if you look at Carl Benz's first car, his 1885 patent motor wagon, it's made of bicycle parts. It's steel tubing, it's chains and spiked pneumatic tires, spiked tires. Um, uh, so it's often new technologies are enabled by uh, a convergence of multiple other technologies that come together. And often one of them is sort of a new technology, and it gets cheap enough that it unlocks this new possibility. So lithium ion batteries is what essentially made the portable consumer electronics possible. Before that, the phones. There's this movie, Wall Street, with Michael Douglas, where he has a mobile phone, and the thing is literally the size of a brick. It's this Motorola phone, and he's holding up to his head, and but the batteries inside were the limiting factor. Most people couldn't afford mobile phones in the 1980s because the phones were big. They took all day to charge. It was something like 10 or 12 hours to charge. You got 30 minutes of talk time. The phones were expensive, as the batteries get cheaper, this unlocks the mobile phone that most people can afford, and that's why it becomes much more popular. Why those phones become much more popular. So um, so yeah, we're seeing convergences of technologies. AI now, AI chips are enabling these humanoid robots to be able to recognize objects the same way that you can upload a photograph to ChatGPT or something and say what's in this photo, and the algorithms are able to determine what's in the photo, and that's essentially what these AI chips are doing in cars and humanoid robots. The car can drive around and it can see something in the road and recognize what it is. It can recognize street signs, and it knows that there's a stop sign up ahead or something, so it knows to stop. Um, so that's the idea of a convergence of technologies. There's often one technology enables another one, just as sometimes new disruptive technologies will disrupt an old one. They will also unlock new possibilities, and often in combination with other technologies that themselves were disruptive. Um, so yeah, that's the idea of a convergence, is that we often see one technology get much cheaper, and it enables whole new possibilities with other technologies, and a new combination will give rise to a new disruption.
Thank you.
And I guess you need to measure this also to be able to predict in a wise way, because we see so many cases saying that how come Kodak didn't realize this? How come Nokia didn't realize this? But if you don't have the measure, then it's easy to go for the feeling, the guts feeling instead of facts, I guess.
Yeah, it's easy, in hindsight, to criticize people and say, why didn't Kodak see digital cameras coming? But Kodak invented the digital camera. It was Steve Sasson, a Kodak engineer, who invented it. So they knew about the technology. There was an internal report published at Kodak in the early 1980s that said digital cameras will take over the market eventually, but it will take about 15 years for the components to get cheap enough. So late 1990s, digital cameras will take over the market. Kodak brought the first digital camera to market. Um, but they were always trying to preserve their old business model. So they made money selling film and then selling the processing services to develop your film and get prints. So they thought of a digital camera as, you take a photo and you can see on the screen on the back what your photo will look like, but you still will always want film. You will send your film to Kodak. They will send you your prints, and they also would mail you a CD with your photos on it. So they were trying to preserve their existing business model because they were making money selling film. But there are so many ways, there's sort of no way to know in advance what is going to work and what isn't. So somebody tries, a service where you can trade MP3 files with each other. Somebody else streams them, so you don't actually download the file. You just you hear it streaming through Spotify or something. And there's no way to know which of those is going to ultimately win in the end. Do people really want thousands of MP3 files on their computer, or do they want to have a list of songs that they can scroll through and click on one and it starts playing instantly? Same with digital photos. It's Apple makes money selling their phones and the camera, but really a lot of the money in digital photography is made from Instagram and these websites that sort your photos for you and store them and share them with people. Social media websites. So there's no way to know what the new business model is going to be. New technologies don't just change, how we do things. They also change how we make money, how the people who sell the technology makes money. So if your business model is based on selling film and selling film processing, then when digital cameras come about, your ability to make money off of it is no better or worse than anybody else's, and the chance that you are going to pick the correct business model is no greater than anybody else's chance. So all of your knowledge in how to make film and how to make well distributed silver, colloidal silver, that will make you whatever, all of your ability to process film quickly, none of that is helpful in a world of digital cameras. So somebody else might find the new business model, find the way to make a lot of money off of the new technology. Just like with robo taxis. Tesla is making cars now. They might not even sell cars. They're a car company that might not sell cars 5 years from now. If they make electric taxis and run them, they can just be a taxi service. And Tesla to you will be an app and a car that rolls up every time you tap on tap on your location on the app. So yeah, a new technology unlocks a new business model, so even if you are a pioneer in developing the new technology, you might not be the one who actually figures out how to make a lot of money off of the new technology, and that's why it's very difficult. And it's easy to say in retrospect, oh, they didn't see this change coming, and it's their fault for not preparing. But for the simple fact is, they were locked into one way of making money. They had one way that was generating a lot of money for them, selling film processing, and they had no better idea than anybody else what the world was going to look like 10 years from now, just as we today have no clue, what energy and transportation and food and agriculture, and nobody knows which of these companies are going to win in the AI space. Will OpenAI and ChatGPT be around 5 years from now, or will it be all open source models, or will it, will Claude and all of these other Google Gemini, will Google still exist 10 years from now? Nobody knows. Maybe they will, or maybe they will get disrupted by a handful of people with a AI tool and a great business model for just raking in money the way that Google did with their online search engine. So yeah, nobody can predict the future. We can only sort of look at the possibilities.
Okay, very interesting.
We had
Marcus had a question.
Yeah, Marcus had a question also.
My question is, because you mentioned Kodak, and they did not only invent the digital camera, they also invented the PDF file, and they could have become Adobe, and I think that they knew exactly what was coming. And my question is, so what can I do as if I'm Kodak or whoever, except that you create a separate entity like Clayton Christensen recommends? So my question is, how can I react in that uncertainty? Because everybody knows that solar will take over, that wind will take over, that electric cars will come. So the trend, I think, is quite clear. But as you said, how do I react in a practical perspective?
Yeah, I think part is just, certain technologies have a lifespan. There was a time when we used coal gas for lighting, and then something better came along. And if you were if you make horseshoes for a living, there's still people making horseshoes, but not like it was when, the number of horses was much larger. And if you decided to stay in the horseshoe business, early 1900s, and you said, my father made them, he was a blacksmith, and I'm a blacksmith, and my son is going to be a blacksmith, then you had a much harder time in life than if you said, okay, I recognize that cars are the new hot thing, and I'm going to learn to repair car engines. So I think part is just, what do you do about it? There are a variety of ways, and some of them, dirty ways that companies try to spread fear about new technologies. We see this now with electric cars, people saying electric cars don't work in the cold or whatever, even though 95% of car sales in Norway are electric now or whatever. And they'll tell you, solar and wind are unreliable, so we need other power sources and things like that. So yes, there are those sorts of ways to sort of slow progress. But I think ultimately there's a life cycle. There's a new product is developed. It rapidly takes over the market. It has some period of time in the sunshine, and then something else comes along. and sort of not. And every technology wants to, every incumbent wants to harness the new technology. So when computers came out, typewriter manufacturers started putting little LCD display screens on them, so that you could type a word and see it on the screen first. They were trying to incorporate, like computer-like features into a typewriter. And nobody wants a typewriter with a little, 8-character screen on it. We want a computer. So at some point, you just realize, you retrain, you protect people, and not particular companies, not particular industries. You just realize, some people need to be retrained. Younger people, guide them to an education that will be useful 20 years from now, not ones that were useful 20 years ago. And just realize that this is part of the life cycle of technology.
Christer?
Wait, beg pardon?
Do you have anything more, Christer?
Yeah, no, I would like, as an end of this, then to thank you, Brad, Libby, very much for this very inspiring presentation, and I hope to see you in Helsinki. We represent an organization, LPPDE, and it's also a non-profit organization where we gather people in Europe and in US once a year, and in April we are meeting in Helsinki with thought leaders to learn more and share more about how to improve your way of developing products and services, and also to disrupt your industries then. So all leaders and developers that are eager to learn about different practices to conquer their current market or new markets with their products and services are welcome to join. And we will have this event on the 27th through the 30th of April. And you can find registration, etc., on our website. So with that, I would like to say thank you, Brad, for today.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much for having me.
Thanks a lot, Brad, and see you all around.
See ya.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
See you.
Bye.